Well, here we are approaching Memorial Day weekend, and I hope that you're going to take some time during this Memorial Day weekend to pray for the families of those that have lost loved ones that served in the military, and that you'll truly honor this holiday weekend, not just with picnics and barbecues, but that you'll also remember in prayer the families that have given the ultimate sacrifice by allowing their family members to die in service of their country. We are tracking Jesus through all of the Gospels. We know that the birth of Jesus was mainly in Matthew and Luke, and not in Mark and John. But we also know that each of the Gospels adds information when there's parallel passages. We've seen Jesus go from calling a few disciples, going down to Jerusalem to the Passover, clearing the temple, stopping in Samaria, ministering to the Samaritan woman who was an adulteress and had lived with 5 men. And now he's moved from Samaria and he's in the area of Galilee, more specifically in Cana of Galilee. Now, if you're not familiar with the geographics of all of this, you need to realize that down at Jerusalem, down parallel with the Dead Sea, is the area of Judea. Samaria is the area partway up to the Sea of Galilee, and the area around the Sea of Galilee is the Galilean region. Canaan is a little bit below Capernaum, which turned out to be Jesus' headquarters for a while, but it's up on the mountains, and Capernaum is down on the Sea of Galilee. And that helps us to understand that when we look at a map, we usually say up or down based on just looking at a flat map. And we would think that if we're moving up the map, that that's north, or we're going up. And if we're looking down on the map, we would be saying we're going down, just as somebody would say going down to Florida and going up to North Carolina. Not because of altitude necessarily, but because of position on the map, on a flat map. Canaan, being south of the Sea of Galilee, would actually be moving up on the map. But because Jesus is in a higher elevation and Capernaum is at a lower elevation, when the nobleman comes to Jesus and says, "Please come, my son is about ready to die," coming down to Capernaum is from an elevation standpoint, not an up or down on a map. Hope that didn't confuse you. Nevertheless, he wants Jesus to come down, and Jesus gives a mild rebuke and saying that people want to see signs and wonders in order to believe. And so it's almost as if he's putting this nobleman to a test. And he says, "Go, your son lives." And it clearly tells us in the text, nobleman went. Now, we don't know with how much conviction he went. I mean, after all, if Jesus wouldn't go, but said his son lives, he didn't have a lot of choice. I mean, he could have said, "I'm not going until you go with me," but he started down, and as he went down, some of his slaves from Capernaum came and met him and said, "Your son lives." Now, this nobleman was no dummy, and he did what he should have done. He said, "At what point did my son begin to get better? When did the fever break? When did it become apparent that he was going to live?" And his slaves answered and said clearly, and I love that about the scriptures. Here it tells us exactly, it says, yesterday at a certain time. And the nobleman thought back and said, that's the exact same time that Jesus said, your son lives, and that I believed him and headed back down. And it says, as a result of this, that the nobleman's entire family became believers. There's always a ripple effect when somebody becomes a believer, when people see things change, when they see someone's life saved, and a drug addict becomes sober, and those that have been wife beaters and terrible citizens become good citizens. It affects others as well. And that's exactly what happened here. And it's very, very interesting and important to note that this man's faith was strengthened by finding the information out, exactly the hour in which his son had been healed. And remember, this story is only in John, so we can't get any additional information from Matthew, Mark, or Luke. But it's a great story of belief, Jesus' healing power. And it ends up by John's narration of saying, and this was the second sign that Jesus did after he had been down to Jerusalem. The first one, of course, speaking with a woman at the well, telling her everything that she had done and knowing all about her life. And here was a second sign. He didn't have to go. He didn't have to touch. He just said, go. And the man went, and his son lived. That's encouraging, isn't it, to know that Jesus doesn't have to be there to perform a healing. Looks for us to have faith and trust in him that he can if he will. Doesn't heal everybody. Be a very false teaching if I said that if you just have faith, anybody can be healed. I've seen lots of people with lots of faith, and their loved ones didn't get healed. But Jesus certainly does do supernatural healings. And we'll someday understand why he does some and why he doesn't do others. Nevertheless, that's my thought for the day. And again, I want to remind you to pray for the families that have lost loved ones in the service of this country. We owe them at least a moment of prayer, asking God to comfort them, to help them, and to have a comforting feeling that people are praying for them because of the sacrifice that they made. That's my thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day. Have a great weekend.